My name is Donna Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. 5 years ago, I thought I had found my happily ever after when I married Gerald. We had our challenges like any couple, but nothing prepared me for what happened at my father-in-law's 60th birthday dinner. One moment I was heading to the bathroom, and the next, red wine was soaking into Frank's expensive white shirt. What followed wasn't just a punch to my face that left blood dripping onto the restaurant floor, but the shattering of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Before I share how my marriage crumbled after that dinner drop, a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to walk away from someone who didn't value you. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Minnesota, raised by parents who taught me the importance of honesty, kindness, and standing up for what's right. My mom was a kindergarten teacher, and my dad worked for the Postal Service. Nothing fancy, but they gave me a childhood full of love and stability. They always told me to find someone who would treat me with respect, someone who would be my partner in all things. I became a nurse because I wanted to help people when they were at their most vulnerable. The hospital became my second home, and I found purpose in the long shifts and challenging cases. My coworkers became like family, especially Brenda, who started on the same day as me in the medical surgical unit. We bonded over shared lunches and post-shift drinks, comparing stories of difficult patients and celebrating successful recoveries. I met Gerald at a hospital charity auction 4 years ago. I was 30 and starting to wonder if I'd ever find someone to build a life with. Gerald approached me at the dessert table, making a joke about the tiny portions of cheesecake. He was handsome in his well-tailored suit with dark hair and a warm smile that reached his eyes. When he told me he was an accountant at a prestigious firm downtown, I was impressed by his ambition and work ethic. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Gerald took me to fancy restaurants I could never afford on a nurse's salary. He sent flowers to the hospital, impressing my coworkers. He remembered little details about my preferences and seemed genuinely interested in my work. Within 6 months, we were talking about a future together. Looking back, I can see how I was swept away by the romance of it all, ignoring subtle warning signs. Gerald proposed after 8 months of dating, presenting me with a diamond ring that seemed almost too extravagant. I said yes without hesitation, caught up in the fairy tale of it all. We planned a small wedding for the following spring, giving us just enough time to organize something beautiful without the stress of a long engagement. The first time I met Gerald's parents was at an upscale steakhouse. Frank Chapman was imposing with a firm handshake and piercing eyes that seemed to evaluate my worth with a single glance. He was a self-made business owner who had built a successful construction company from nothing. Phyllis, Gerald's mother, was perfectly coiffed and polite, but there was a distance to her warmth that made me uneasy. During that dinner, Frank asked pointed questions about my family, my career, and my ambitions. When I mentioned my parents' occupations, I noticed a slight curl of his lip. "Teaching and mail delivery," he said. "Honest work." The way he said it made it clear he thought it was beneath him. Gerald quickly changed the subject, and I told myself Frank was just old-fashioned. After we left, Gerald apologized for his father's behavior. "Dad can be intense," he said. "He just wants to make sure I'm with someone who fits into our family." I should have paid more attention to the implication that I needed to prove my worth, that I needed to fit into their world rather than Gerald and I creating our own. As the wedding approached, there were more uncomfortable moments with Frank. He questioned the cost of the wedding, even though Gerald and I were paying for most of it ourselves. He made comments about my dress being a bit much for a second wedding, though I had never been married before. Each time Gerald would smooth things over, make excuses, or change the subject. Phyllis was less overtly critical, but no more welcoming. She insisted on being involved in every wedding decision, from the flowers to the menu. When I chose a cake flavor she didn't approve of, she went behind my back and called the bakery to change the order. Gerald laughed it off. "Mom has strong opinions about dessert," he said, as if that made her behavior acceptable. We married in a lovely ceremony at a local garden surrounded by friends and family. My parents beamed with pride, though I could tell they were intimidated by the Chapman family's obvious wealth and status. The day was beautiful, but looking back, I can see the cracks that were already forming in the foundation of our marriage. After the honeymoon, we moved into a condo that Gerald had purchased before we met. Though he insisted it was now our place, it never truly felt like mine. His furniture, his taste, his rules about where things belonged. When I suggested repainting the bedroom to a color we chose together, he said he'd think about it, but somehow we never got around to it. Gerald's parents lived across town in an expansive house in the most exclusive neighborhood. We were expected for dinner every Sunday, a tradition Gerald assured me was non-negotiable. These dinners became a weekly exercise in restraint as I endured Frank's subtle digs at my career, my appearance, or my opinions. "Nurses are just doctors' assistants, right?" he once asked with a smirk. Another time he suggested I might want to dress more appropriately when I wore a knee-length skirt he deemed too short. Phyllis would fill these dinners with stories about Gerald's childhood achievements, the family's prestigious connections, and not-so-subtle hints about grandchildren. "You're not getting any younger, Donna," she would say, ignoring the fact that Gerald and I had agreed to wait a few years before starting a family. Each time Frank or Phyllis crossed a line, I would look to Gerald, hoping he would stand up for me, for us. Instead, he would change the subject or laugh uncomfortably. Later, when I expressed my hurt, he would say, "That's just how they are. They don't mean anything by it." Or worse, "You're being too sensitive. They're just trying to help." Over time, I learned to stay quiet at these dinners, to smile and nod, and be the perfect daughter-in-law they clearly wanted. I started to lose pieces of myself, becoming smaller and more cautious to avoid their criticism. Gerald seemed relieved by my compliance, which only deepened my sadness. There were good times too, moments when Gerald and I connected as we had during our courtship. Weekend trips to the coast, quiet evenings, watching movies, conversations about our dreams for the future. But these moments became fewer as Gerald worked longer hours and spent more time with his father discussing business opportunities. A week before Frank's 60th birthday, Gerald informed me that Frank had reserved a private room at Le Chateau, the most expensive restaurant in town. "Dad wants the whole family there," he said, "and he specifically asked that you wear something elegant. You know how important appearances are to him." I spent hours finding the perfect dress, an elegant navy blue number that was conservative enough for Frank's taste but still made me feel beautiful. I had my hair professionally styled and even splurged on a manicure. I was determined to make this evening perfect to finally win Frank's approval. As we drove to the restaurant, Gerald squeezed my hand. "Thanks for making such an effort," he said. "Dad will appreciate it." I smiled back, ignoring the voice in my head that wondered why I was trying so hard to please someone who had never shown me an ounce of genuine kindness. Little did I know that this dinner would be the breaking point, the moment when I could no longer ignore the truth about my marriage and the family I had married into. The private dining room at Le Chateau was intimidatingly elegant, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over the perfectly set table. A bottle of champagne was already chilling in an ice bucket when we arrived, and the staff hovered attentively, ready to fulfill Frank's every whim. Frank sat at the head of the table, like a king holding court. Phyllis to his right, looking polished in a silver dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Gerald's brother Wayne and his wife Karen were already seated. Wayne was the spitting image of his father, right down to the expensive watch and calculating eyes. Karen gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had been married to Wayne for 10 years and seemed to have perfected the art of being exactly what the Chapman family wanted. "You're late," Frank stated flatly as we took our seats, though we were actually 5 minutes early according to the invitation. "Traffic was heavy, Dad," Gerald replied, immediately defensive. "You look great. Happy birthday," Frank grunted in acknowledgement before turning to the waiter. "We'll have the Chateau Margaux 1995, he ordered without consulting anyone else at the table. "And bring the appetizers now. I'm not waiting any longer." I sat quietly, folding my napkin neatly in my lap and taking small sips of water. The tension in the room was palpable, with Frank already on his second glass of scotch before the wine even arrived. Phyllis kept up a stream of superficial conversation about their recent cruise and the incompetence of their new landscaper. The waiter poured the wine a rich red that Frank insisted was wasted on most people's unrefined palates. He raised his glass. "To 60 years of making my own success," he toasted himself. Everyone dutifully raised their glasses. As the appetizers arrived, Frank turned his attention to me. "So Donna's still changing bedpans?" he asked with a smirk. I took a deep breath. "I'm actually working in the cardiac unit now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's challenging, but rewarding." Frank snorted. "Glorified babysitting. Should have gone to medical school if you wanted a real healthcare career." Gerald laughed nervously. "Dad, Donna's great at what she does. Her patients love her." "I'm sure they do," Frank said dismissively. "Women are naturally caregivers. Nothing special about that." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that this was his birthday, that getting through this dinner peacefully was the goal. Beside me, Gerald squeezed my knee under the table, a gesture that once might have felt supportive, but now felt like a warning to stay quiet. The main course arrived, an elaborate presentation of filet mignon with truffle sauce. Frank dominated the conversation, boasting about a recent business deal and criticizing a competitor who had the audacity to bid against him for a major contract. "The man's a fool," Frank declared, draining his third glass of wine. "Doesn't know who he's dealing with." As the dinner progressed, Frank's voice grew louder, his gestures more expansive. He was clearly drunk, though no one dared mention it. Phyllis tried once to suggest he might want some water, only to be silenced with a glare. By the time dessert was served, an elaborate chocolate creation with "Happy 60th Birthday" written in gold leaf, Frank was slurring his words and making increasingly inappropriate comments about the female staff. I caught the eye of our server, a young woman named Joyce, and mouthed, "Sorry," when Frank commented on her figure. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment of respite from the suffocating atmosphere. As I made my way back to the table, I had to navigate between closely placed tables in the main dining room. A waiter carrying a tray of drinks emerged suddenly from the kitchen door, and as I stepped aside to let him pass, my hip bumped the edge of the table. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion after that. I stumbled slightly, reaching out to steady myself, and my hand knocked into the waiter's tray. A glass of red wine tipped over its contents, arcing through the air in a crimson stream that landed directly on Frank's crisp white shirt and splashed onto his suit jacket. For a moment, everyone froze. The red stain bloomed across Frank's chest like a violent flower. His face contorted in shock, then rage. Before I could even begin to apologize, he was on his feet. "You clumsy idiot," he roared. What happened next still plays in my nightmares. Frank's right hand balled into a fist and swung toward me with shocking speed. His knuckles connected with my face, the impact exploding across my cheekbone and nose. The force knocked me backward, and I stumbled against a chair, barely catching myself from falling completely. The pain was immediate and intense, a bright burst of agony that radiated from my nose throughout my skull. I felt something warm and wet streaming down my face, and when I touched my fingers to my nose, they came away covered in blood. Drops of it splattered onto the polished floor of the restaurant. The room went deadly silent. Other diners stared in horror. The waiter stood, frozen tray still in hand. Joyce, who had been serving another table, gasped audibly. Then Frank's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Stupid maid, wash my shirt." I stood there, blood dripping between my fingers as I tried to stem the flow from my nose, unable to comprehend what had just happened. My ears were ringing and my vision blurred with tears of pain and shock. Gerald finally stood up, but instead of coming to my aid, he looked embarrassed. "Dad, please sit down," he whispered urgently. "People are staring." Frank didn't sit. "Look what she did," he shouted, pointing at his stained shirt. "This suit cost $3,000. Joyce appeared at my side with a clean napkin. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" Her voice seemed to come from far away. "I'm fine," I managed to say. though I was anything but fine. The napkin quickly became soaked with blood. The restaurant manager approached his face grave. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," he said to Frank. "We don't tolerate violence in our establishment." Frank turned his rage on the manager. "Do you know who I am? I could buy this place and fire you tomorrow." Throughout this, Gerald remained silent, looking between his father and me with an expression of confused loyalty. Finally, he moved toward me, not to comfort me, but to usher me out. "We should go," he said quietly. "Your wife needs medical attention," Joyce insisted. "Her nose might be broken." "It's not broken," Gerald said dismissively, though he had no way of knowing. "We'll take care of it." As Gerald guided me toward the door, I heard Phyllis apologizing to the manager, explaining that it was just a misunderstanding, while Wayne quickly paid the bill. No one apologized to me. No one acknowledged that Frank had assaulted me in front of a room full of witnesses. In the car, I held the bloodied napkin to my face, still in shock. Gerald started the engine without a word. "He punched me," I finally said, my voice thick with blood and tears. "Your father punched me in the face." Gerald's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "You spilled wine all over him," he replied, as if that justified what had happened. "It was an accident," I said, disbelief coloring my voice. "And he called me a maid." "You know how he gets when he drinks?" Gerald said, the familiar excuse rolling off his tongue. He didn't mean it. I stared at my husband, suddenly seeing him clearly for the first time. "He punched me," I repeated. "There's no excuse for that. Ever." Gerald drove in silence for several minutes. Then, just before we reached our condo, he said the words that would end our marriage. "You should apologize to him tomorrow. For the wine and for making a scene." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Apologize to him? He assaulted me, Gerald. In public. I should be filing a police report. Gerald's face hardened. "Don't be dramatic. It wasn't that hard of a hit." The remainder of the drive passed in stunned silence. By the time we reached our building, I knew with absolute certainty that my marriage was over. I just didn't know yet how I would find the strength to leave. The elevator ride up to our 12th floor condo felt endless. Gerald stood as far from me as the small space allowed, as if my bloody face embarrassed him. When we finally entered our apartment, I went straight to the bathroom to assess the damage. The mirror revealed what I already knew from the pain. My nose was swollen, a dark bruise already forming across the bridge. My left cheekbone was red and beginning to swell where Frank's knuckles had connected. Blood had dried around my nostrils and on my upper lip. My once carefully applied makeup was smeared and ruined, and specks of blood stained the neckline of my expensive dress. I wet a washcloth and gently cleaned my face, wincing at the tenderness. Gerald appeared in the doorway, watching me with an unreadable expression. "You need to put ice on that," he said flatly. "What I need," I replied, meeting his eyes in the mirror, "is for my husband to act like he cares that his father assaulted me." Gerald crossed his arms defensively. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Dad lost his temper. He's under a lot of stress with the new development project." I turned to face him directly. "Stress doesn't justify violence. Would you say the same thing if he punched a business associate, a waiter, a stranger on the street?" "That's different," Gerald insisted. How is it different?" My voice rose with incredulity. "Because they're not family," Gerald shouted. "Family forgives. Family understands. Family protects each other," I countered. "You should have protected me." Gerald ran a hand through his hair in frustration. What was I supposed to do? Make a bigger scene? Get in a fistfight with my own father on his birthday? "You could have defended me," I said quietly. "You could have told him his behavior was unacceptable. You could have helped me instead of worrying about how it looked to strangers." "You know how important appearances are to my family," Gerald said, as if that explained everything. I stared at him, really seeing the man I had married. Not the charming suitor who had swept me off my feet, but a weak man who valued his father's approval above all else, even his wife's safety and dignity. "I'm going to bed," I said, suddenly exhausted. "We can talk about this tomorrow when we've both calmed down." "There's nothing to talk about," Gerald replied. "Dad will expect an apology and you're going to give it to him. That's how this works." I froze in the process of walking past him. "Excuse me." "You heard me. You'll call him tomorrow and apologize for ruining his birthday and his suit." "And if I refuse?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Gerald's expression hardened. "Then you're not the woman I thought I married." "And you're definitely not the man I thought I married," I replied, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my hands. We stood there in tense silence until Gerald's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. "It's Dad," he said, moving to answer it. I walked to our bedroom and closed the door, but I could still hear Gerald's side of the conversation. His voice was deferential, apologetic. "Yes, Dad. I know. She's upset, but she'll come around. Of course. Yes, first thing tomorrow." When he came into the bedroom 20 minutes later, his face was set in a mask of determination. "Dad expects you at their house tomorrow at 10, he announced. "Wear something nice and bring flowers for Mom. She's upset about the scene you caused." "The scene I caused?" I repeated in disbelief. "Your father punched me in the face and I caused a scene." "Don't start this again," Gerald warned. "Just do what needs to be done so we can move past this." "I'm not apologizing to a man who assaulted me," I stated clearly. "And I'm disturbed that you would expect me to." Gerald threw his hands up in exasperation. "What do you want from me, Donna? He's my father. This is my family." "I'm your family too," I said softly. "Or at least I thought I was." "Then act like it," Gerald snapped. "Family stands together. Family forgives." "Family doesn't punch each other in the face over spilled wine," I countered. Gerald's expression darkened. "I'm not discussing this anymore. You will apologize to my father tomorrow or what?" I challenged. "Or you can get out." The words hung in the air between us, shocking in their finality. I stared at my husband, the man who had vowed to love and cherish me, who was now choosing his abusive father over my safety and dignity. In that moment, something broke inside me, but something else, something stronger was born from the pieces. "I'll get my things," I said quietly. Gerald looked startled, as if he hadn't expected me to choose this option. "Don't be ridiculous. Where would you even go?" "Anywhere would be better than staying with someone who thinks I deserve to be punched in the face," I replied, pulling a suitcase from the closet. As I began packing my clothes, Gerald's shock turned to anger. "You're overreacting. You always do this, make everything into a bigger deal than it is." I continued packing methodically, selecting only what I truly needed. Gerald paced the room, alternating between trying to make me feel guilty and threatening what would happen if I left. "You'll regret this," he warned. "Dad knows everyone in this town. You think your job at the hospital is secure? You think anyone will believe you over him?" When I didn't respond, he grabbed his phone. "Fine, I'm calling Dad." He put the call on speakerphone, clearly expecting Frank's voice to intimidate me into submission. Frank answered on the second ring. "Gerald, what is it?" "Donna's threatening to leave," Gerald said, watching me for a reaction. "She refuses to apologize." Frank's voice was slurred with alcohol and rage. "Put that ungrateful woman on the phone." Gerald held the phone out to me. I zipped my suitcase closed and took it from him. "Frank," I said calmly, "what you did tonight was assault. I will not apologize for accidentally spilling wine, and I will not subject myself to your abuse or your son's cowardice any longer." Frank's response was a stream of profanity and threats that I refused to let touch me. I handed the phone back to Gerald, picked up my suitcase, and walked toward the door. "If you leave now, don't bother coming back," Gerald called after me, his voice breaking slightly, the first sign that he understood the gravity of what was happening. I turned to look at him one last time. "I wouldn't dream of it," I said, and walked out the door. In the elevator, my hands shook violently as the adrenaline coursed through my system. My face throbbed with pain and tears threatened to spill over. But underneath the fear and hurt, there was a tiny spark of something that felt like freedom. I drove to Brenda's apartment across town, calling her from the car to make sure she was home. I didn't tell her what had happened, just that I needed a place to stay. As I parked outside her building, I caught a glimpse of my bruised face in the rearview mirror and finally allowed myself to cry great heaving sobs that released some of the shock and pain of the night. By the time Brenda opened her door, I had wiped away my tears, though I couldn't hide the bruising. Her expression of horror when she saw my face told me everything I needed to know. I had made the right choice. This wasn't normal. This wasn't acceptable. And I deserved better. "What happened to your face?" Brenda gasped, pulling me inside her apartment. Under the bright lights of her entryway, the bruising must have looked even worse than it had in my bathroom mirror. "Frank punched me." I said the words, still feeling surreal as they left my mouth. "At his birthday dinner. I accidentally spilled wine on him and he punched me in the face." Brenda's expression shifted from shock to fury. "He did what? Where's Gerald? Did he call the police?" I set my suitcase down and sank onto Brenda's couch. "Gerald told me to apologize to Frank. When I refused, he told me to get out." The absurdity of it hit me anew as I said it aloud. "You're kidding me." Brenda sat beside me, examining my face with the critical eye of a nurse. "Your nose doesn't look broken, but you should get x-rays. And we need to document this. We should go to the ER." I shook my head. "I can't face anyone right now." "Donna, you need to file a police report," Brenda insisted. "Frank assaulted you. That's a crime." "He's the most influential developer in town," I reminded her. "He plays golf with the police chief. He's donated millions to the hospital board." Brenda's jaw set stubbornly. "I don't care if he's the president. He can't get away with this." My phone buzzed with a text from Gerald. "You're being childish. Come home and we'll talk in the morning." It was followed immediately by another. "Dad's willing to forget the whole thing if you apologize sincerely." I showed the messages to Brenda, who snorted in disgust. "Block him," she advised, "at least for tonight." As if on cue, my phone began ringing. Gerald's face appeared on the screen, a happy photo from our anniversary dinner just 2 months ago. I declined the call. "You can stay here as long as you need," Brenda assured me, bringing me an ice pack for my face. "The pull-out couch isn't great, but it's yours." I thanked her, overwhelmed by the simple kindness that stood in such stark contrast to what I had just experienced. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Gerald. To my surprise, it was Wayne Gerald's brother. "Are you okay?" his text read. "What Frank did was wrong. I should have said something." I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Wayne had always been his father's son, following Frank's lead in all things. This unexpected show of support left me momentarily speechless. "I'm safe," I finally replied. "Thank you for checking." The next morning, my face looked even worse. The bruise had darkened to a deep purple that spread across my cheekbone and the bridge of my nose. The swelling had increased, making it painful to talk or change expressions. Brenda insisted on taking photos to document the injury. "Just in case," she said grimly. I called the hospital and requested medical leave, vaguely citing a family emergency. My supervisor, Marion, was understanding but concerned. "Take the time you need," she said. "We'll cover your shifts." Gerald had left 7 voicemails and dozens of texts overnight, cycling between anger manipulation and false concern. "You're embarrassing yourself," read one message. "Everyone thinks you're overreacting," claimed another. Then, "I'm worried about you. Please come home." Around noon, a text arrived from Phyllis. "You deliberately provoked Frank. You've always been jealous of our family's success. Gerald deserves better." I blocked her number immediately, feeling a strange sense of calm detachment. These people who had intimidated me for years suddenly seemed small and pathetic. their wealth and status meaningless in the face of their moral bankruptcy. By the afternoon, Gerald had escalated to threats. "Dad's furious. You don't want to make an enemy of him. Think about your career." I was drafting a response when my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Donna, it's Wayne." His voice was hushed, as if he didn't want to be overheard. "I just wanted to check if you're all right." "As all right as I can be with a bruised face and a husband who thinks I deserved it," I replied. Wayne was silent for a moment. "Gerald's always been blind when it comes to Dad," he finally said. "Listen, I can't talk long, but I wanted you to know that Karen and I saw what happened. If you need witnesses, we'll tell the truth." I was stunned by the offer. "Thank you, Wayne. That means a lot." "Dad's been like this my whole life," Wayne continued. "Mom makes excuses, Gerald pretends not to see it. I've been too cowardly to stand up to him, but hitting you crossed a line." After we hung up, I sat on Brenda's couch trying to process everything. My face throbbed with each heartbeat, a physical reminder of the violence that had shattered my marriage. But it was the emotional pain that cut deeper, the betrayal by the man who had vowed to love and protect me. My parents called that evening, having sensed something was wrong when I didn't answer their usual Sunday call. I hadn't planned to tell them yet, not wanting to worry them when they were so far away in Minnesota, but I couldn't lie when my mother asked directly if I was okay. "Gerald and I have separated," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There was an incident with his father." "What kind of incident?" my father asked, his voice sharpening with concern. I took a deep breath. "Frank punched me in the face when I accidentally spilled wine on him at his birthday dinner." The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother's voice, tight with controlled fury. "We're coming. We'll be on the first flight tomorrow." Despite my protest that they didn't need to travel all that way, they were adamant. "You're our daughter," my father said simply. "We'll be there." That night, as I tried to sleep on Brenda's pull-out couch, the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. I had left my home, my marriage, and potentially my career if Frank made good on his threats. The future I had planned, the life I had built, had crumbled in an instant. Yet beneath the fear and uncertainty, there was a glimmer of something else, a growing certainty that I had made the only choice possible to preserve my dignity and safety. The next day, Brenda insisted I see a doctor to check my injuries. The urgent care physician confirmed what I already knew as a nurse: no broken bones, just severe bruising that would heal with time. The doctor gave me a knowing look as she examined my face. "Do you feel safe?" she asked quietly. "I do now," I answered truthfully. "I've left him." She nodded approvingly. "Good. Too many women don't." She documented the injury carefully in my chart, another piece of evidence should I need it. Later that afternoon, as Brenda and I researched divorce attorneys, my phone rang with yet another unknown number. It was Richard Sullivan, a lawyer Brenda's cousin had used for her divorce. "Ms. Mitchell," his professional voice asked, "your friend Brenda suggested you might need legal advice. I have an opening tomorrow at 10 if you'd like to come in." I accepted gratefully, feeling a small sense of control returning. I was taking steps, making decisions for myself again. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since the incident, I felt a flicker of hope that I would find my way through this. My parents arrived that evening, their faces lined with worry, and barely contained anger when they saw my bruised face. My mother enveloped me in a gentle hug, careful not to press against my injuries. My father stood slightly apart, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "We're here now," my mother soothed, stroking my hair as she had when I was a child. "Whatever you need, we're here." Their unwavering support was the final confirmation that I had made the right choice. Family doesn't hurt you. Family protects you. Family stands by you when you're vulnerable. In leaving Gerald, I hadn't lost family. I had reclaimed the true meaning of the word, and the following days brought a flurry of activity as the situation escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Gerald showed up at Brenda's apartment unannounced, pounding on the door and demanding to speak to me. Brenda, fiercely protective, called building security before even considering opening the door. "You can't hide from me, Donna," Gerald shouted through the door. "Stop being ridiculous and come home." I stood frozen in Brenda's kitchen, listening to my husband's voice transform from pleading to threatening. "My father wants to talk to you," he continued. "He's willing to be reasonable if you just apologize." Security arrived and escorted Gerald from the building, but the incident left me shaken. This wasn't the man I had fallen in love with. Or perhaps it was, and I had been blind to his true nature all along. My meeting with Richard Sullivan, the attorney, was eye-opening. A distinguished man in his 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, he listened carefully as I recounted what had happened, occasionally taking notes. "This is clear-cut assault," he said when I finished. "And your husband's response constitutes a form of emotional abuse. Based on what you've told me, you have grounds not only for divorce but for a restraining order against both your husband and father-in-law." I hadn't considered a restraining order, but the relief I felt at the suggestion told me it was the right move. "Would it actually keep them away from me?" I asked. "It creates legal consequences if they try to contact you," Richard explained. "And it establishes a record of their behavior, which strengthens your position in the divorce proceedings." I left his office with paperwork for a temporary restraining order and the first steps toward filing for divorce. The legal terminology was intimidating, but Richard had explained everything clearly. For the first time, I felt like I had an advocate who understood the gravity of what I was facing. That same afternoon, I received a disturbing call from Sylvia, a colleague at the hospital. "Donna, I thought you should know," she said hesitantly. "There are rumors going around that you had some kind of breakdown. Administration was asking questions about your mental health history." My blood ran cold. Why would they do that?" Sylvia lowered her voice. "Someone made a call suggesting you might be unstable, that your medical leave wasn't for the reasons you stated. I defended you, of course, but I thought you should be prepared." It didn't take much to guess who had made that call. Frank's influence extended throughout the city, including the hospital where he had donated a wing 3 years ago. He was making good on his threat to impact my career. When I told my parents and Brenda about this development, my father's face darkened with anger. "This is harassment," he stated. "We need to fight back." Brenda nodded in agreement. "And we need to document everything. Every call, every text, every rumor. It all builds the case." The next blow came when I tried to withdraw money from the joint account Gerald and I shared. The teller gave me an apologetic look. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Chapman, but this account has been emptied. The funds were transferred yesterday." I left the bank in a daze. Gerald had taken all our money, including my portion of our savings and my last paycheck. It was a calculated move to leave me financially vulnerable, to force me back to him out of necessity. Richard was furious when I told him. "This is financial abuse and it's against the law during divorce proceedings," he assured me. "We'll add this to the filing and request emergency spousal support." That evening, as my parents and I were discussing next steps over dinner at Brenda's apartment, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Donna Mitchell?" a man's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Detective Barnes with the police department. We've received a report of an assault that allegedly took place at Le Chateau restaurant 4 nights ago. The report names you as the victim." I was stunned. I didn't file a police report. "No, ma'am. The report was filed by a restaurant employee named Joyce Kendrick. She witnessed the incident and provided a detailed statement. We'd like you to come in and tell us your side of the story." I agreed to meet with the detective the following morning, my mind racing. Joyce, the server who had helped me after Frank punched me, had taken action on her own. Her bravery in standing up to someone as powerful as Frank Chapman left me both grateful and anxious about the potential backlash she might face. Later that night, I received a call from an attorney representing Frank. His voice was smooth and practiced, the kind of polished tone that comes with expensive education and wealthy clients. Ms. Mitchell, my name is Thomas Wilkins. I represent Frank Chapman. I'm calling to discuss a possible resolution to this unfortunate situation. What kind of resolution? I asked cautiously. Mr. Chapman is prepared to offer a generous settlement if you agree to drop all charges and sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the events of Saturday night. How generous? I found myself asking, though I already knew I wouldn't accept. $50,000, he replied. Enough to help you relocate and start fresh somewhere new. All we require is your silence and cooperation. The offer was tempting in my financially precarious position, but it represented everything wrong with the situation. Frank thought he could buy his way out of consequences, just as he had likely done throughout his life. Please tell Mr. Chapman that his assault on me is not something he can make disappear with money, I replied. I'll see you in court. After hanging up, I immediately called Richard to report the attempted bribe. He wasn't surprised. It's a common tactic with wealthy clients, he explained. The fact that they're offering money shows they're worried. That's actually good for us. The next morning I met with Detective Barnes, a serious woman with steady eyes and a reassuring manner. I told her everything that had happened, showing her the photos Brenda had taken of my injuries. Joyce Kendrick's account matches yours exactly, Detective Barnes confirmed. And we've obtained security footage from the restaurant that clearly shows the assault. Mr. Chapman will be charged with battery. I felt a strange mix of vindication and dread. While I wanted Frank to face consequences for his actions, I knew that criminal charges would escalate the situation further. The Chapman family would not take this lying down. Sure enough, by that afternoon, Gerald was calling repeatedly, his messages growing increasingly desperate. Dad's being charged with assault, he said in one voicemail. This has gone too far, Donna. You need to drop the charges. Think about what this will do to our family. I didn't respond, but I saved the message as evidence of the continued pressure. Every interaction reinforced my decision to leave. The man I had married was more concerned with protecting his abusive father than with my well-being. That evening I received a text from Karen Wayne's wife. Frank is on a rampage. Be careful. Wayne and I support you, but we have to be careful too. The family lawyers are saying you planned this to extort money. The accusation was so absurd, it would have been laughable if it weren't so malicious. I had left my home with nothing but a suitcase of clothes. I was staying on a friend's pull-out couch, yet somehow I was being painted as the calculating villain in this scenario. As difficult as this period was, it also brought unexpected support. A nurse from the cardiac unit stopped by Brenda's with homemade lasagna and words of encouragement. My former patient, an elderly woman named Clara, sent flowers with a note saying she was praying for me. Even Dr. Lewis, the chief of cardiology known for his gruff manner, called to assure me that my position at the hospital was secure regardless of Frank Chapman's influence. We value good nurses more than donors, he stated firmly. Take the time you need, and your job will be waiting. During this tumultuous time, I found unexpected solace in a domestic violence support group that Richard had recommended. Sitting in a circle with women from all walks of life, I was struck by the commonalities in our stories. The gradual isolation, the excuses we made for our partners, the moment when we could no longer deny the truth of our situations. It's like waking up from a spell, said Janice, a woman in her 50s who had left a 20-year marriage. Suddenly you see all the red flags you'd been ignoring. As I listened to these women share their journeys, I began to recognize patterns in my own marriage that I had overlooked or rationalized. Gerald's constant criticism disguised as helpful suggestions, the way he consulted his parents about major decisions without involving me. His dismissal of my concerns as overreactions. These weren't just annoying habits. They were forms of control and emotional manipulation that had slowly eroded my sense of self. With each passing day, I grew more certain of my decision to leave, even as the challenges mounted. Frank's influence made finding new housing difficult, as several landlords mysteriously backed out after initially accepting my application. The financial strain of legal fees and daily expenses weighed heavily despite my parents' generous help. Yet I also felt a growing strength, a reclaiming of the confidence and independence I had gradually surrendered during my marriage. The woman who walked out of Gerald's condo that night was finding her voice again, ready to fight for the life and dignity she deserved. 2 weeks after Frank punched me, I stood in the county courthouse for the hearing on my request for a permanent restraining order. Richard had helped me secure a temporary order, but this hearing would determine whether Frank and Gerald would be legally required to stay away from me long term. The courtroom was intimidating with its dark wood paneling and formal atmosphere. I wore a simple navy dress that Brenda had lent me, my bruises, now faded to a yellowish green that makeup couldn't entirely conceal. My parents sat in the gallery behind me, solid presences, lending me strength. Frank and Gerald entered with Thomas Wilkins and another attorney, both in expensive suits that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Frank looked smug, as if the proceedings were a mere inconvenience that his money would soon resolve. Gerald wouldn't meet my eyes, staring straight ahead with a tense jaw. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, called the court to order. Richard presented our case, first submitting the photos of my injuries, medical records, and statements from witnesses at the restaurant. "Your Honor," Richard concluded, "the evidence clearly shows that Frank Chapman committed a violent assault against my client, and that her husband Gerald Chapman not only failed to protect her, but actively pressured her to return to an abusive situation. Ms. Mitchell fears for her safety, and these restraining orders are essential for her protection." Thomas Wilkins rose next, his manner smooth and confident. "Your Honor, while we regret the unfortunate incident at Le Chateau, Mr. Frank Chapman's actions were an instinctive response to having an expensive suit ruined. Ms. Mitchell has a history of emotional instability and is using this minor altercation to extract financial gain from the Chapman family." I gasped audibly at the blatant lies. Frank's punch had been deliberate and vicious, not an instinctive response, and I had no history of emotional instability whatsoever. Wilkins continued, "As for Gerald Chapman, he is a devoted husband who simply wants his wife to come home. Any suggestion that he poses a threat to Ms. Mitchell is absurd." Gerald nodded vigorously at this, still avoiding my gaze. The judge looked skeptical. "Do you have evidence of Ms. Mitchell's alleged emotional instability?" "We have statements from family members," Wilkins replied, "and we've subpoenaed her employment records from the hospital." Richard objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is a transparent attempt to smear my client's reputation. There is no history of mental health issues, and the hospital records would confirm that if they were actually produced, which they have not been because they don't support counsel's claims." The judge nodded. "I'm inclined to agree, Mr. Wilkins. Do you have any substantive evidence to counter the eyewitness accounts and photographic evidence of the assault?" "We have Mr. Chapman's account," Wilkins said, seeming slightly less confident. "And we would like to call Gerald Chapman to testify about the events of that evening." Gerald took the stand, and under Wilkins' questioning painted a picture of me as clumsy, attention-seeking, and prone to exaggeration. He claimed I had bumped into Frank deliberately and made a huge scene over a tap on the face. I felt sick listening to his lies, this rewriting of an event that had left me bleeding and traumatized. When Richard cross-examined him, he asked pointed questions about the blood on the restaurant floor, the statements from other diners, and why Gerald had told me to apologize or leave if the incident was so minor. Gerald's answers became increasingly defensive and contradictory. "Donna always overreacts," he insisted. "She likes drama. The blood wasn't that much. I just wanted her to apologize so we could all move on as a family." After Gerald stepped down, Richard called a surprise witness, Joyce, the server from Le Chateau. My heart raced as she entered the courtroom, looking nervous but determined in a simple blouse and slacks. "Ms. Kendrick," Richard began, "could you please tell the court what you witnessed at Le Chateau on the night in question?" Joyce's voice was steady as she recounted exactly what had happened. How I had accidentally bumped the waiter, how the wine had spilled on Frank, and how Frank had immediately punched me with enough force to knock me backward and cause my nose to bleed profusely. "It was shocking," Joyce stated. "In my 7 years as a server, I've seen plenty of accidents and angry customers, but I've never seen anyone respond with violence like that. And then to call her a stupid maid and tell her to wash his shirt while she was bleeding, it was disgusting. Thomas Wilkins attempted to discredit Joyce's testimony, suggesting she had a personal grudge against wealthy patrons or was seeking publicity. Joyce remained calm. "I'm risking my job by being here," she said simply. "I'm testifying because what I saw was wrong and the truth matters." When all testimony concluded, the judge took only a brief recess before returning with her decision. Based on the evidence presented, including photographic documentation of injuries, medical records, and credible eyewitness testimony, I am granting the permanent restraining orders against both Frank Chapman and Gerald Chapman. She looked directly at Frank. "Mr. Chapman, the court takes a very dim view of physical assault regardless of the provocation, which in this case appears to have been entirely accidental. Your response was grossly disproportionate and potentially criminal." Turning to Gerald, she added, "Mr. Chapman, your failure to protect your wife from violence and your subsequent pressure for her to apologize to her attacker shows a disturbing lack of regard for her well-being. Both of you are ordered to maintain a distance of at least 100 yards from Ms. Mitchell and to have no contact with her except through legal counsel." Relief washed over me as the judge's ruling was entered into the record. Outside the courtroom, I thanked Joyce tearfully for her courage in testifying. "I couldn't stay silent," she said. "Not when I saw what he did to you and then how they tried to make it your fault." The restraining order was a significant victory, but it was just the beginning of what would be a protracted legal battle. Frank, furious at being publicly censured, became even more determined to punish me. The next day, a reporter from the local newspaper called asking for my comment on the incident at Le Chateau. "We've received an anonymous tip about a disturbance involving Frank Chapman," the reporter explained. "Would you care to give your side of the story?" After consulting with Richard, I provided a brief factual statement about what had occurred. The resulting article published the following day was surprisingly balanced, including Joyce's account and noting that the court had granted restraining orders against both Chapman men. The public exposure of Frank's behavior created a sudden shift in the power dynamic. Frank had built his reputation on being a tough but respected businessman. The image of him punching a woman over spilled wine painted him as a volatile abuser, damaging both his personal and professional standing. Calls for his resignation from several charity boards followed. Business associates began distancing themselves. The Construction Workers Union, which had long had conflicts with Frank's company over labor practices, used the incident to renew their criticism of his character. In the midst of this public relations crisis, I received an unexpected email from a woman named Eileen, who identified herself as Frank's former secretary. "I worked for him for 3 years," she wrote. "What happened to you wasn't an isolated incident. He threw a stapler at me once when I made a scheduling error. I never reported it because I needed the job and was afraid of being blacklisted. But I'm willing to talk to your lawyer if it would help." Her email was followed by messages from 2 other former employees with similar stories. Frank's violent temper, it seemed, was an open secret among those who had worked closely with him. Each person who came forward strengthened my resolve and my legal position. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings had begun in earnest. Gerald, finally realizing the seriousness of the situation, attempted to negotiate through his attorney. He offered to return half of our joint savings if I would agree to a quick, quiet divorce with minimal alimony. "He's trying to cut his losses," Richard observed. "The Chapman name is taking a hit, and he wants this over with." I was tempted to accept just to be done with the whole ordeal, but Richard advised patience. "You're entitled to a fair settlement," he reminded me. "Don't let them pressure you into accepting less than you deserve." As the legal processes inched forward, I began to consider my longer-term future. Returning to work at the local hospital, still within Frank's sphere of influence, seemed increasingly unwise. I began applying for nursing positions in other cities, focusing on places where I could make a fresh start. A message from a nursing recruitment agency caught my attention, a cardiac unit position at a prestigious hospital in Seattle. The salary was significantly better than my current job, and the distance from Gerald and Frank was appealing. After a phone interview that went surprisingly well, I was offered the job. As I contemplated this potential new chapter, Gerald made one last desperate attempt to reconcile. He showed up at my parents' hotel one evening, flowers in hand, eyes red from what appeared to be genuine tears. "Donna, please," he begged when my father reluctantly let him speak to me in the hotel lobby. "I've made terrible mistakes. I should have protected you. I see that now. Give me another chance." Looking at him, I felt a complex mix of emotions: residual affection, pity, anger, and most surprisingly, indifference. The man who had once been the center of my world now seemed like a stranger, or worse, someone I had never truly known. "I'm moving to Seattle," I told him. "I've accepted a new position there." Gerald's face crumpled. "You can't just leave. What about us, 5 years of marriage, and you're throwing it all away?" "You threw it away," I corrected him gently. "The moment you chose your father over me. The moment you told me to apologize to a man who assaulted me or get out of my own home." "I was confused," Gerald insisted. "Dad has always been such a force in my life. I didn't know how to stand up to him." "I understand that," I replied, surprising myself with the realization that I did in fact understand the complex dynamics that had shaped Gerald into the man he was. "But understanding doesn't mean I can ever trust you again. Some things can't be undone, Gerald." As he left, shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt the final threads of our marriage severing. There was sadness, yes, but also a profound sense of liberation. I was choosing myself, my safety, my future, and that choice, difficult as it was, felt utterly right. 1 year after that fateful dinner at Le Chateau, I stood on the balcony of my Seattle apartment watching the sun set over Elliott Bay. My new home was small but entirely mine, decorated with items I had chosen that reflected my taste, not Gerald's or his mother's. Potted herbs lined the railing, their fresh scent filling the air when I brushed against them. The journey to this moment had been harder than I could have imagined. The final months in my hometown had been a grueling gauntlet of legal proceedings, financial stress, and emotional recovery. The divorce was eventually settled, with Gerald agreeing to a fair division of assets and a reasonable alimony payment for 2 years to help me transition to independence. Frank had been ordered to attend anger management classes as part of a plea deal that allowed him to avoid jail time for the assault. The public exposure had cost him significantly, both in business opportunities and social standing. Wayne had reached out once more before I left town, telling me that the incident had forced him to confront his own complicity in his father's behavior over the years. He and Karen were in therapy, working to break the cycle of enabling that had defined the Chapman family for generations. My first weeks in Seattle had been lonely and disorienting. Despite the excitement of a new job and fresh start, I found myself crying unexpectedly at odd moments, grieving not just for my failed marriage, but for the future I had once envisioned. The busy hospital shifts left me physically exhausted, which was almost a blessing, as it allowed me to fall into dreamless sleep instead of lying awake replaying the painful moments of the past year. Finding a therapist was one of the first things I did after settling in. Eileen was a compassionate woman specializing in trauma and recovery who helped me understand that my reactions were normal, that healing wasn't linear, and that I had shown remarkable strength in leaving an abusive situation. "Many people stay," she told me in one of our early sessions. "The fact that you recognized the situation for what it was and took action to protect yourself shows tremendous courage and self-respect." Gradually, I began to build a life in my new city. I found a favorite coffee shop where the barista learned my order. I discovered a hiking trail with stunning views of Mount Rainier. I made my first friend Susan, a fellow nurse who invited me to join her book club. 6 months into my new job, I received an email from Gerald. My heart raced when I saw his name in my inbox, old anxiety surfacing instantly. His message was lengthy, filled with apologies and reflections on how he had failed me. "I've been in therapy," he wrote. "I'm learning about the patterns I inherited from my father, about how I prioritized his approval over everything else, including your safety and happiness. I know it's too late for us, but I wanted you to know that I recognize what I did wrong. You deserved better, and I'll always regret that I couldn't be the husband you needed. I read the email several times searching for manipulation or hidden agenda, but it seemed genuinely remorseful. Still, I chose not to respond. Whether his apology was sincere or not, reopening that door would serve no purpose in my healing journey. Some chapters needed to remain closed. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my confidence and rediscovering parts of myself that had been suppressed during my marriage. I joined a hiking group finding joy in outdoor adventures I had never pursued with Gerald, who preferred golf and indoor activities. I volunteered at a women's shelter using my nursing skills to provide health screenings and basic medical advice. On a warm spring evening, 9 months after moving to Seattle, I met Robert at a hospital fundraiser. An ER doctor with kind eyes and an easy laugh, he asked thoughtful questions and listened attentively to my answers. When he asked if I'd like to have coffee sometime, I surprised myself by saying yes. Our relationship developed slowly, each of us carrying past experiences that made us cautious. I was transparent about my history, and he never minimized or dismissed my concerns. The first time he met my parents, who were visiting from Minnesota, my father pulled me aside afterward. "He looks at you with respect," he observed. "That's the foundation of everything good." Brenda visited in the summer, amazed at the transformation in me. "You're you again," she said as we explored Pike Place Market. "Actually, you're more you than I've ever seen. You're glowing." On the anniversary of leaving Gerald, I took the day off work and hiked to a quiet spot overlooking the city. I brought a journal and wrote about everything that had happened, everything I had learned, everything I had survived. As I wrote, I realized that leaving that night hadn't been an ending but a beginning, not a failure, but an act of profound self-love. The woman who had stood trembling in Brenda's apartment a year ago, face bruised and future uncertain, could never have imagined the peace and strength I now felt. The journey had been painful, but it had led me here to a life that was authentically mine. I had learned that family isn't defined by legal bonds or shared names, but by respect, support, and love. I had learned that walking away from abuse isn't weakness, but courage. Most importantly, I had learned that I was stronger than I ever knew, capable of rebuilding from ashes, of starting again when everything familiar was gone. As I watched the sunset from my balcony that evening, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the painful wisdom I had gained. Frank's punch had shattered my marriage, but in doing so, it had freed me from a life of diminishing myself to please others. Gerald's betrayal had broken my heart, but it had also shown me what I truly deserved in a partnership. Sometimes the most devastating moments in our lives become the catalysts for our greatest growth. Sometimes what feels like an ending is really the first step toward a more authentic beginning. And sometimes walking away is the bravest thing we can do. Have you ever had to walk away from someone or something that was hurting you? It takes incredible courage to choose yourself when others are telling you to compromise your worth. Share your story in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe if this resonated with you. Remember, you deserve to be treated with respect and dignity always. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it gives strength to anyone facing a similar crossroads in their life.